I'm going to call this one Preaching School by the Bishop, Presiding Bishop Emeritus Charles Edward Blake. Uh, Bishop Blake was one of my favorite preachers. So I took a deep dive on him. And a deep dive back in that day is that I ordered whatever tapes or videos that were out there of him speaking at other places. I would order them. I've ordered tapes from Azusa, from some charismatic churches. I think I even saw, and once Bishop Blake preached at Hampton. Yeah, Pentecostals can preach at Hampton. But he became one of my favorite preachers. And if I would say anything to a young preacher, do deep dives on guys. So you may be a good preacher on your own. I think I'm a decent preacher. But what people don't know is that I've taken deep dives on the masters. I have the late Bishop G.E. Patterson. The one time he came to my home, he saw wall-to-wall videotapes up in one room upstairs that had BIB on them, Bountiful Blessings there. So I learned their stories. That I've heard them preach so many times in so many places that I started knowing guys' pocket sermons, and I would even know their stories. So that's a lesson. If you want to do as the greats did, I'm not saying copy, emulate, or anything like that, but at least know their stories. And the Bishop Blake had a story about a kindergarten teacher. But before I tell you about that story from the kindergarten teacher, also, I respect Bishop Blake because he gave credence that you can be a Pentecostal preacher with a manuscript. Yes. Because you hold a manuscript, as Bishop Brian Keith Williams says. He said, he was told so many times that you can't carry no file on that paper. He said, but he learned over time that you can start a fire with some paper. I was thinking about Bishop Blake. If he gave you 21 reasons to live holy, I don't care if the house caught fire at 12. If he wrote it, you're going to get 21 reasons to live holy. He ain't going to cut his message. Whatever's on that paper, you finna hear it. So he took manuscript preaching as a Pentecostal to an art form. But Bishop Blake, the reason why I said this preacher school about Bishop Blake was he was told in a story I've heard multiple times by one of his early teachers. The teacher's name was Mrs. Batchelder. That's something when you listen to a guy enough that you know his stories. Mrs. Batchelder told him and told the class, Charles Blake will never be a great speaker. So many years later, as a leader in one of the world's largest denomination, and then later in latter years as a leader of one of the world's largest denominations, he said this. He said, I may have not done any good or great speaking, but I've sure done some speaking. Stop allowing people to speak death over your gift because it's different. Stop allowing people to speak death over your promise, your purpose, and the leadings that God has given you. Because you never know if you keep following your leading, you'll never know the great places and where if you follow the leading that God has given you, where you might end up. And all of this came from the Bishop Charles, presiding Bishop Emeritus, the Bishop Charles E. Blake Sr. Be blessed.